I signed a loan. My son-in-law took me out to celebrate at a bar. After a few rounds, he insisted on one last drink. I agreed, unfortunately. The next day, I woke up on an abandoned street with no memory, but when I decided to get my revenge. 17 missed calls. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought a signature could change my life so completely. At 66, I had been through enough to know better, but somehow Roger made it all seem so reasonable, so necessary. My daughter Sarah sat beside me at the bank that Tuesday morning, her hand resting protectively over her growing belly. 6 months pregnant with my first grandchild, she looked tired, but hopeful. "Dad, I can't thank you enough for this," she whispered, as we waited for the loan officer to return with the final paperwork. "Roger and I have been looking for a house for months, and with the baby coming." I squeezed her hand gently. "That's what family is for, sweetheart." Roger paced by the window, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in hushed tones to what I assumed was his real estate agent. He had always been attentive to Sarah, almost protective in a way that reminded me of myself when I was younger. When he finally hung up and joined us, his face was lit with excitement. "The seller accepted our offer," he announced, leaning down to kiss Sarah's forehead. "We're really doing this, honey, our own home." The loan officer, a stern woman in her 50s, returned with a thick stack of documents. "Mr. Hartwell, this is quite a substantial amount. $250,000 is not a small commitment for someone in retirement." I nodded, understanding the weight of what I was doing. My pension was decent and I had some savings, but this loan would stretch me thin for the next 15 years. Still, watching Sarah's face light up with hope made it worthwhile. "I understand," I told the officer. "This is for my family." Roger cleared his throat. "Actually, there's been a small change. The house we're buying is slightly more expensive than we initially thought. The final amount will be $275,000. I felt a small knot form in my stomach. An extra $25,000 was not insignificant, but Sarah's hand tightened around mine and I could see the worry creeping into her eyes. "Dad, if it's too much," she began. "No," I said firmly. "We've come this far. Let's finish this." The signing process took nearly 2 hours. Page after page of legal documents, terms and conditions, payment schedules. Roger was incredibly helpful, pointing out sections and explaining things that seemed confusing. He had always been good with paperwork, working as he did in some kind of financial consulting firm. "This clause here," he said, leaning over my shoulder as I signed, "just means that if anything happens to you, the responsibility transfers to Sarah and me. It's standard protection for the bank." I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? He had been part of our family for 3 years, married to my Sarah, and had never given me any reason to doubt his character. He was always the first to help with yard work when he visited, always brought flowers for Sarah, always asked about my health with genuine concern. By the time we left the bank, it was nearly noon. The documents were filed, the loan approved, and the money would be transferred to the sellers within 48 hours. Sarah hugged me tightly in the parking lot, tears of gratitude in her eyes. "I promise we'll pay you back every penny, Dad, once Roger's promotion comes through." "Don't worry about that now," I told her. "Focus on preparing for the baby." Roger clapped me on the shoulder with a broad smile. "This calls for a celebration, don't you think? Sarah, you head home and rest. Thomas and I should toast to our new partnership." Sarah looked uncertain. "Are you sure? You both seem tired." "Just a quick drink," Roger assured her. "Your dad deserves to celebrate after what he just did for us." I wasn't much of a drinker, but the idea of bonding with my son-in-law appealed to me. We had always gotten along well, but we had never spent much time alone together. This seemed like an opportunity to strengthen our relationship. "One drink won't hurt," I agreed. Roger suggested a bar downtown called Murphy's. It was the kind of place I would never have chosen myself, dimly lit with worn leather booths and the smell of cigarettes that had somehow survived years of smoking bans. But Roger seemed comfortable there, greeting the bartender by name. "2 whiskeys," he ordered before I could protest. "The good stuff, Mike. We're celebrating." The first drink went down smoothly. Roger was charming company, telling stories about his work, asking about my years in construction, sharing his excitement about becoming a father. He seemed genuinely interested in my opinions about everything from raising children to home repairs. "You know, Thomas, I've always admired how you raised Sarah on your own after Margaret passed," he said during our second round. "That couldn't have been easy." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest at the mention of my late wife. "Sarah made it easy. She was such a good kid. She still talks about those fishing trips you used to take her on," Roger continued. "How you taught her to bait her own hook because you wanted her to be independent. I was surprised he knew about that." Sarah and I had gone fishing every weekend for years after her mother died, just the two of us figuring out how to be a family without Margaret's steady presence. Those trips had been sacred to us. She remembers that? I asked. All the time. She says those trips taught her more about life than anything else. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the whiskey. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was the genuine affection I heard in Roger's voice when he talked about Sarah. But I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in months. One more, Roger suggested as our glasses emptied. A proper toast to the new house? I hesitated. I could already feel the alcohol more than I should have. At my age, 2 drinks was usually my limit, but Roger was looking at me with such enthusiasm, such genuine appreciation for what I had done for them. All right, I agreed, but this is the last one. Roger signaled the bartender for another round, but this time he ordered something different. Try this, he said, sliding a glass toward me. It's a local specialty, smoother than the whiskey. The drink had an unusual taste, sweet, but with an underlying bitterness that I couldn't quite place. Roger watched me take the first sip with an odd intensity that should have concerned me. Good? He asked. Different, I replied, taking another sip. What's in it? Trade secret, Roger laughed. Mike here won't tell anyone his recipe. As I continued drinking, I began to feel strange. Not just drunk, but disoriented in a way that seemed wrong. The bar around me started to blur at the edges, and Roger's voice seemed to be coming from very far away. You feeling all right, Thomas? Roger asked, but his concern sounded hollow, almost mocking. I tried to answer, but my tongue felt thick and unresponsive. The last thing I remembered clearly was Roger's hand on my shoulder and his voice saying something about getting me some fresh air. The cold hit me first, a bone-deep chill that seemed to seep through my clothes and settle in my joints. Then came the smell of garbage and urine, so overwhelming that my stomach lurched before I was even fully conscious. I tried to open my eyes, but the light sent shooting pain through my skull. Where was I? I lay still for several minutes, trying to piece together fragments of memory, the bank, the loan documents, Sarah's grateful smile, Roger suggesting drinks, the bar with its dim lighting and worn leather seats. Everything after that third drink was a complete blank. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself up to a sitting position. The world spun violently, and I had to press my palms against the rough pavement to keep from falling over. Pavement. I was lying on pavement in what looked like an alley behind some kind of industrial building. My head pounded with each heartbeat, but it was a different kind of hangover than I had ever experienced. This wasn't just alcohol. Something was very wrong. I checked my pockets with trembling hands. My wallet was gone, my car keys were gone, my cell phone was gone. Even my watch, the one Margaret had given me for our 20th anniversary, was missing from my wrist. I was completely alone in an unfamiliar part of the city, with no money, no identification, and no way to contact anyone. Panic started to rise in my throat. How long had I been here? The sun was high overhead, suggesting it was midday, but I had no idea what day it was. Had I been unconscious for hours or days? I managed to stand on shaky legs, using the brick wall behind me for support. The alley opened onto a street I didn't recognize, lined with warehouses and empty lots. No people in sight, no businesses that looked open. My mouth was so dry it felt like sandpaper, and my clothes smelled like they had been soaked in alcohol and left to dry. It took me nearly an hour to find my way to a main road, and another 30 minutes of walking before I spotted a gas station. The young clerk behind the counter looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion as I approached. I need to use your phone, I said, my voice coming out as a croak. I've been robbed. She wrinkled her nose at the smell coming from my clothes. Pay phone's outside. I don't have any money. Please, I just need to call my daughter. After a long moment, she slid her cell phone across the counter. Make it quick. My hands shook as I dialed Sarah's number. It rang once, twice, and then her voice came through high and frantic. Dad? Dad, is that you? Oh my God. Where have you been? I've been calling you all night. Sarah, I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could I tell her that I had no memory of the last 18 hours? That I had woken up in an alley like some kind of vagrant? Roger came home last night and said you left the bar suddenly, she continued, talking so fast I could barely keep up. He said you seemed confused and upset, and you just walked out without saying anything. We've been worried sick. I called you 17 times. 17 times. The number hit me like a physical blow. While I was unconscious in that alley, my pregnant daughter had been calling and calling, probably imagining the worst. Where are you now? Sarah asked. Roger went out looking for you this morning. He's been driving around the city for hours. Something about that statement bothered me, but my head was still too foggy to figure out what. I'm at a gas station on Industrial Boulevard. I don't know how I got here. Industrial Boulevard? Dad, that's miles from Murphy's bar. What were you doing there? I had no answer for her. Can you come pick me up? I'll explain everything when you get here. Of course, stay right where you are. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I handed the phone back to the clerk and walked outside to wait. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, but I couldn't stop shivering. Nothing about the previous night made sense. Roger had seemed genuinely concerned about me at the bar. Why would he tell Sarah that I had left suddenly and seemed upset? When Sarah arrived, her face was pale with worry. She jumped out of her car almost before it stopped moving and rushed to embrace me. "Dad, you look terrible. What happened to you?" "What?" I caught my reflection in her car window and understood her concern. My hair was disheveled, my clothes were wrinkled and stained, and there was dirt on my face that I hadn't noticed before. I looked exactly like what I was, an old man who had been found in an alley. "I don't remember," I admitted as she helped me into the passenger seat. "The last thing I clearly recall is having that third drink with Roger. After that, everything is blank until I woke up in an alley this morning." Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You don't remember leaving the bar?" "No, nothing. Roger said you started acting strange after that last drink. He said you kept talking about needing to check on something at home and then you just got up and walked out. He tried to follow you, but you told him to leave you alone." I stared at her profile as she spoke. None of that sounded like something I would do. Especially not to Roger. We had been having such a pleasant evening together. Did he say anything else? Sarah hesitated and I could see her struggling with something. "He was really upset, Dad. He kept saying he should have insisted on driving you home, that he should have known you had too much to drink." "Sarah, I only had 3 drinks over the course of several hours. I wasn't drunk." "But Dad," she pulled into my driveway and turned to face me. "Your car is here in the garage. How did it get here if you didn't drive it home?" My blood went cold. I always parked my car in the driveway, never in the garage. The garage was cluttered with old furniture and Christmas decorations, leaving barely enough room for a car. "Someone else had put it there. Roger found it this morning when he came looking for you," Sarah continued. "He said you must have driven home and then wandered off on foot. The keys were on your kitchen counter, but I knew I didn't have my keys when I woke up in that alley. Someone had taken them from me, driven my car to my house, and then abandoned me miles away with no memory of how I got there. As we sat in my driveway, I looked at my house, at my car hidden in the garage, at my daughter's concerned face, and I realized that everything Roger had told her was a lie. But why would he lie? And more importantly, what had really happened to me in those missing hours? The truth was starting to take shape in my mind, terrible and unthinkable, but I couldn't share it with Sarah. Not yet. Not until I understood exactly what had been done to me and why. "Let's get you inside," Sarah said gently. "You need a shower and some rest. We can figure everything else out later." But as I walked toward my front door, I knew that rest wouldn't come easily. Someone had stolen hours from my life, and I was determined to get them back. The shower helped clear my head, but it couldn't wash away the growing dread in my stomach. As hot water ran over my aching body, I noticed bruises on my arms that I couldn't remember getting. Dark purple marks that looked like someone had gripped me tightly. The physical evidence of my missing hours was written on my own skin. Sarah had made coffee and was waiting in my kitchen when I emerged, her face etched with worry lines that seemed to have appeared overnight. She was staring at her phone, scrolling through something with increasing agitation. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I sat down across from her, noting how she avoided direct eye contact. "What is it?" "Did you give Roger access to the loan money?" My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "I'm looking at our joint account, the one Roger and I set up for the house purchase. The money from your loan was supposed to be transferred there yesterday, but it's not there." Her voice was getting higher, more strained, and when I called the bank this morning to check on the transfer, they said the money had already been moved to another account. I felt the room start to spin again, but this time it had nothing to do with whatever drug I had been given. "What other account?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out. The bank won't give me details because my name isn't on the loan. They said I need your authorization or Roger's signature to get any information." "Roger's signature? Why would Roger have access to my loan?" Sarah's hands were shaking as she set down her phone. "Dad, you signed papers yesterday giving Roger power of attorney over the loan funds. Don't you remember?" I searched my memory of the signing process, trying to recall every document I had put my name to. There had been so many papers, and Roger had been so helpful in explaining them all. "This clause here," I could hear his voice saying, "just means that if anything happens to you, the responsibility transfers to Sarah and me." But that wasn't what he had said at all, was it? My memory of his exact words was fuzzy, but I was starting to understand that Roger had deliberately misrepresented what I was signing. "I need to call the bank," I said, reaching for Sarah's phone. The conversation with the loan officer confirmed my worst fears. Roger had indeed been given access to the funds as my designated representative. The money, all $275,000, had been transferred to an account under his name at a different bank early that morning. "But sir," the loan officer explained patiently, "you signed the authorization yourself. It's right here in your file. The transfer was legitimate." After I hung up, Sarah and I sat in stunned silence. The weight of what had happened was settling over us like a suffocating blanket. "He planned this," I said finally. "The whole thing. The celebration, the drinks, drugging me. He needed me out of the way while he moved the money." Sarah shook her head violently. "No, Dad. There has to be an explanation. Roger wouldn't do this to us. He wouldn't do this to me." But even as she said it, I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. The pieces were fitting together too perfectly to be coincidence. "Where is Roger now?" I asked. "He said he was going to keep looking for you, but—" She checked her phone. "He's not answering my calls." I stood up on unsteady legs. "We need to go to the house, the one we were supposed to buy. Dad, you're in no condition to go anywhere." "Sarah, if I'm right about this, we need to act fast. Every minute we wait is another minute for Roger to disappear completely." The drive to the address Roger and Sarah had given me took 25 minutes. It was a beautiful neighborhood, the kind of place any young family would dream of living. Large yards, mature trees, houses that spoke of stability and success. But when we pulled up to the address, my heart sank. The house had a large "sold" sign in the front yard, but it wasn't recent. Weeds were growing around the base of the sign, and the edges were faded from weather exposure. "This house has been sold for months," I said quietly. Sarah stared at the sign, her face pale. "But Roger showed me the listing. We drove by here just last week, and he probably told you it would be ours soon. A neighbor working in his yard noticed us sitting in the car and walked over. You folks lost?" I rolled down the window. "We were looking at this house. Do you know who bought it?" "Oh, that was sold back in February. Nice young couple from out of state. They've been doing renovations ever since." February, 3 months before Roger had even mentioned house hunting to Sarah. As we drove away, Sarah finally broke down completely. "He's been lying to me for months," she sobbed, "about everything. The house, the sellers, probably even his job." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "We'll figure this out." But privately, I was beginning to understand the full scope of Roger's deception. He hadn't just stolen money from me. He had constructed an elaborate fantasy to manipulate both Sarah and me into giving him exactly what he wanted. When we returned to my house, there was a car in the driveway that I didn't recognize. A man in an expensive suit was standing on my front porch checking his watch impatiently. "Mr. Hartwell?" he called as we got out of Sarah's car. "I'm Detective Morrison. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your son-in-law." My heart rate spiked. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest you're not the first family Roger has targeted." Detective Morrison spread a collection of photographs across my kitchen table. Each one showed an elderly person, and each one had Roger standing beside them, smiling that same charming smile I had come to trust. "Roger Phillips, also known as Roger Davidson, Roger Martinez, and Robert Patterson," the detective explained. "He's been running this same con across 3 states for the past 2 years." Sarah had gone completely silent, staring at the photos with a look of growing horror. "The pattern is always the same," Morrison continued. "He targets families with elderly members who have access to significant assets. He marries into the family, gains their trust, and then manipulates them into signing over money or property." "But he's been with Sarah for 3 years," I protested. "Has he? Are you certain about that timeline?" Sarah looked up sharply. "We met 3 years ago, but we didn't start dating seriously until about 18 months ago, and we only got married." She paused, calculating. 8 months ago, right around the time he would have started planning this particular con, Morrison said grimly. I felt sick to my stomach. What happened to the other families? Similar situations. Elderly victims sign documents they don't fully understand. Money disappears and Roger vanishes. The victims are often left with significant debt and no way to recover their losses. "But surely Sarah would have seen signs," I said, looking at my daughter. "Wouldn't she have known if he was lying about basic things like his identity?" Morrison's expression was sympathetic. "Mr. Hartwell, your daughter is pregnant, emotional, and has been systematically manipulated by a professional con artist. Roger is very good at what he does. He creates detailed backstories, maintains fake social media profiles, even has associates who will vouch for his identity if needed." Sarah suddenly stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "I'm going to be sick." She ran to the bathroom and I could hear her retching violently. Whether it was morning sickness or the shock of learning her entire marriage was a lie, I couldn't tell. "What happens now?" I asked Morrison. "We've issued a warrant for his arrest, but he's probably already left the state. These guys typically have exit strategies planned well in advance." He handed me his card. "I'll need you both to come in and give formal statements, but I wanted to warn you first. Based on his pattern, Roger will likely try to contact Sarah one more time." "Why?" Morrison's expression was grim. "Because he's not finished with her yet." I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. 3 days after Detective Morrison's visit, I was sitting in Dr. Patterson's office getting blood work done to confirm what substances Roger had used to drug me. The tests would take a week to come back, but the doctor had already found traces of something called rohypnol in my preliminary screening. "It's commonly known as a date rape drug," Dr. Patterson explained gently. "It causes memory loss, disorientation, and can be extremely dangerous when mixed with alcohol, especially for someone your age." The clinical terminology didn't lessen the violation I felt. Roger hadn't just stolen my money. He had chemically erased hours of my life to do it. My phone rang as I was leaving the doctor's office. It was my sister Helen calling from Phoenix. Helen was 5 years younger than me, and we had always maintained a cordial but distant relationship since she moved to Arizona 20 years ago. "Thomas, I just got off the phone with Sarah," she said without preamble. "I'm very disappointed in you." I stopped walking, confused by her tone. "Disappointed about what?" "About this whole mess with Roger. Sarah told me everything, and I can't believe you're doing this to them." "Helen, what exactly did Sarah tell you?" "That you've been drinking too much and that you're making up stories about Roger to avoid taking responsibility for losing their house money." Her voice was sharp with disapproval. "Thomas, the girl is 6 months pregnant. How can you put her through this stress?" I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. "Sarah said I made up the story about Roger. She said you've been acting paranoid and confused lately, and that when you couldn't remember where you put the money, you decided to blame Roger rather than admit you have a drinking problem." The betrayal cut deeper than anything Roger had done to me. My own daughter, the child I had raised alone after Margaret's death, was telling family members that I was a delusional drunk. "Helen, that's not what happened. Roger drugged me and stole the money. There's a police investigation." "Oh, Thomas." Her voice was now filled with pity rather than anger. "Sarah said you might say that. She's worried about you. We all are." After Helen hung up, I sat in my car for a long time trying to process what had just happened. Why would Sarah lie to our family about what really occurred? Why would she protect Roger after everything we had learned? I got my answer when I arrived home and found Sarah waiting in my kitchen, her face red and swollen from crying. "Dad, we need to talk about what you've been telling Helen." Sarah flinched. "You talked to Aunt Helen?" She called to lecture me about my drinking problem and my paranoid delusions about Roger. I sat down across from her, studying her face. "Why, Sarah? Why are you lying for him?" "I'm not lying for him," but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm trying to protect our family." "Our family? Roger isn't part of our family anymore." "Yes, he is." She placed both hands protectively over her belly. "He's the father of my baby, Dad. Whether he stole money or not, he's still going to be connected to us for the rest of our lives." I stared at her, trying to understand her logic. "So you're going to pretend he didn't destroy our lives?" "I'm trying to minimize the damage." Her voice rose defensively. "Do you have any idea what this scandal is doing to me? My friends are asking questions, my co-workers are gossiping. Everyone knows about the police investigation now, and you think lying about it will make it better? I think admitting that I was completely fooled by a con artist makes me look like an idiot," she shouted. "I think having a father who was stupid enough to sign over $275,000 to a criminal makes our whole family look incompetent." The truth hit me like a slap. Sarah wasn't protecting Roger. She was protecting her own image. She was embarrassed by what had happened to us, and it was easier to blame my supposed mental decline than to admit she had been married to a professional criminal. "So you're going to tell everyone I'm senile and alcoholic instead?" "I'm going to tell them that you made a mistake and that Roger took advantage of your confusion." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's better than the alternative." "Better for who? For me? For my baby? Do you want your grandchild to grow up knowing their father is a wanted criminal?" I felt something break inside my chest. "I want my grandchild to grow up knowing the truth." "The truth is ugly, Dad. The truth is humiliating. The truth serves no one." After Sarah left, I called my brother Michael in Denver. If Helen had heard Sarah's version of events, I figured Michael probably had too. I was right. "Tom, I've been meaning to call you," Michael said. Helen told me about your troubles. Have you considered seeing someone, a counselor maybe? Michael, I'm not having mental health problems. I was the victim of a crime. I know that's how it feels to you, but Sarah is worried that you might be developing dementia. She said you've been forgetful lately, mixing up details about things. What things? Like thinking Roger stole money when you actually just misplaced it somewhere, or believing you were drugged when you really just had too much to drink. I realized that Sarah had been building this narrative for days, probably since the moment she decided that the truth was too embarrassing to acknowledge. She had carefully crafted a story that painted me as a declining old man, whose confusion had led to a family crisis. Michael, there are police reports, there's physical evidence. Sarah mentioned that you filed some kind of report, but she said the police told her there wasn't enough evidence to pursue it. That was a lie. Detective Morrison had specifically told us that the investigation was ongoing, and that they expected to make an arrest within weeks. You know what's funny? Michael continued. Sarah said you might call family members and try to convince them of this story about Roger. She said it's part of how these paranoid delusions work. I hung up without saying goodbye. Over the next 2 days, I received calls from cousins, old friends, and even my former coworkers. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They had heard from Sarah that I was having difficulties, that I was confused and possibly drinking too much, and that I might try to involve them in my delusions about Roger. Sarah had systematically contacted everyone in my life and poisoned them against me before I even knew what was happening. The final blow came on Friday evening. I was watching the news when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see 2 police officers standing on my porch. For a moment, I thought they might have news about Roger's arrest. I was wrong. Mr. Hartwell, we've received a wellness check request from your daughter, the younger officer explained. She's concerned about your mental state and thinks you might be a danger to yourself. A danger to myself? She mentioned that you've been drinking heavily and making erratic decisions with money. She's worried you might do something impulsive. I stared at them, understanding finally dawning. Sarah hadn't just discredited me with our family and friends. She had convinced the police that I was mentally unstable. Officers, my daughter is protecting her husband, who stole $275,000 from me. Detective Morrison can verify that there's an active investigation. The officers exchanged glances. Sir, we spoke with Detective Morrison before coming here. He said the investigation was suspended due to lack of evidence and the victim's unreliable testimony. My heart sank. Either Morrison had lied to me, or Sarah had somehow convinced the police that I was an unreliable witness. We're not here to arrest you, Mr. Hartwell, the older officer said kindly. We just want to make sure you're okay. Your daughter mentioned that you've been living alone and that she's worried about your judgment. As I stood in my doorway being questioned about my mental competency by police officers, I realized that Roger's con had been even more sophisticated than I had understood. He hadn't just stolen my money and disappeared. He had turned my own daughter into his accomplice, someone who would continue his work of destroying my credibility long after he was gone. And the most devastating part was that Sarah probably didn't even realize she was doing it. She genuinely believed she was protecting our family by rewriting history, by making me the problem instead of Roger. But as I watched the police cars pull away from my house, I made a decision. I had spent my entire life protecting Sarah, just as I was now protecting her from the ugly truth about her husband. But if she wanted to destroy my reputation to save her own, she was going to find out that this old man still had some fight left in him. I learned something important during those dark weeks when everyone believed I was losing my mind. Being underestimated is the greatest advantage an old man can have. While Sarah continued to spread her narrative about my declining mental state, I began my own investigation into Roger's true identity. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen, my next-door neighbor of 15 years, knocked on my door one evening with a concerned expression. Thomas, I hope you don't mind me asking, but that young man who was married to Sarah, is he in some kind of trouble? Why do you ask? Who? Well, yesterday morning I saw him in your driveway very early, maybe 5 in the morning. He was loading boxes into a moving truck. I thought it was strange because Sarah told me they were buying a house, not moving. My blood ran cold. When exactly was this? Wednesday morning. The day after you came home looking so terrible. She studied my face carefully. Thomas, are you all right? You look upset. Mrs. Chen, are you absolutely certain it was Roger? Oh yes, I've seen him many times when he visits Sarah. He was being very quiet about it, like he didn't want anyone to notice. Wednesday morning was the day after I had woken up in that alley. While I was still trying to piece together what had happened to me, Roger had been at my house loading a truck with stolen goods. Did you see what he was taking? Boxes mostly, and what looked like electronics. Your television, maybe? I wondered why he would be moving your things if he and Sarah were buying their own place. That evening, I conducted a thorough inventory of my house. My television was indeed gone, along with my computer, my collection of silver coins that Margaret had left me, and several pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my late wife. Items that Roger had access to because Sarah had given him a key to my house months ago. But Mrs. Chen's information was just the beginning. Over the next week, I quietly visited every business in the area around Murphy's Bar, asking if anyone remembered seeing Roger and me that Tuesday night. At a 24-hour diner 3 blocks from the bar, I hit pay dirt. "Oh yeah, I remember you," the night shift waitress said when I showed her a photo of Roger and myself from Sarah's wedding. "This guy brought you in around 11 o'clock. You were in bad shape, barely conscious. He kept saying you'd had too much to drink. What happened then? He ordered coffee for you, but you couldn't even hold the cup. He was real concerned, kept checking his phone like he was waiting for something. Then around midnight, 2 other guys showed up." "2 other guys?" "Yeah, they seemed to know him. They helped carry you out to a van in the parking lot. The young guy, your friend there, he paid for the coffee and left a big tip. Said you'd be fine once you slept it off." I felt sick to my stomach. Roger hadn't just drugged me and abandoned me. He had accomplices, and they had moved me around the city like a piece of cargo while I was unconscious. "Did you get a look at these other men?" One was older, maybe 50, the other was younger, probably mid-20s. They all acted like they'd done this before, you know? Very organized. I thanked her and left, my mind racing. This wasn't Roger's first time running this particular con, and he hadn't been working alone. My next stop was the industrial area where I had woken up. I spent hours walking the neighborhood looking for security cameras or witnesses who might have seen something. Most of the businesses were closed or abandoned, but I finally found a small auto repair shop that had been open late that Tuesday night. The owner, a man named Carlos, remembered seeing a van parked in the alley around 2 in the morning. "I was working late on a rush job," he explained. "Heard some voices outside, looked through the window and saw 3 guys pulling someone out of a van. Looked like the person was passed out drunk." "Did you see their faces?" "Not really. It was dark, and I was more focused on my work, but I remember thinking it was weird that they just left the guy there and drove off." "You didn't call the police?" Carlos shrugged apologetically. "I figured it was just some friends dumping off their drunk buddy. Happens more than you'd think in this neighborhood." The pieces were falling into place, but I needed more than eyewitness accounts. I needed documentary evidence that would prove Roger's guilt beyond any doubt. That's when I remembered something Detective Morrison had said during our meeting. He had mentioned that Roger used multiple identities and maintained fake social media profiles. If Roger was as professional as Morrison suggested, he would have left a digital trail somewhere. I had never been particularly good with computers, but my neighbor's teenage grandson, Danny, was a wizard with technology. I offered to pay him $50 to help me research Roger's online presence. "This is going to be like detective work," I told him. "I need to find out everything I can about someone who's been using fake identities." Danny's eyes lit up with excitement. "Cool, like catfish hunting?" Within 2 hours, Danny had uncovered a web of deception that was far more extensive than I had imagined. Roger had profiles on multiple dating sites, each one using a different name and backstory. In some profiles, he was a successful businessman. In others, he was a widowed father looking for love. In still others, he was a military veteran struggling to readjust to civilian life. "Dude, this guy is seriously messed up," Danny said as we scrolled through profile after profile. "Look at this one. He's using your daughter's wedding photos, but he's claiming to be recently divorced." But the most damning discovery came when Danny found Roger's real name, Robert Phillips. Not Roger Phillips, as he had told us, but Robert. And under that name, we found court records from 3 different states. "He's been sued 12 times in the past 5 years, Danny read from the screen. "Fraud, breach of contract, identity theft. And look at this, Mr. Hartwell. He was married to someone else just 18 months ago in California." My hands were shaking as I read the court documents. Roger's previous wife, Linda Martinez, had filed for divorce citing systematic financial abuse and identity fraud. According to her testimony, Roger had convinced her elderly father to sign over power of attorney for his retirement accounts, then disappeared with over $300,000. "The pattern is exactly the same," I murmured. "There's more," Danny said grimly. "Look at this Facebook page." On the screen was a profile for Robert Phillips, complete with photos of him with Linda Martinez and her family. But the most shocking part was the timeline. According to his posts, Roger had been married to Linda until just 8 months ago, which meant he had been married to 2 women simultaneously for over 2 years. "Mr. Hartwell, this guy didn't just steal from you. He's been stealing from families all over the country." That night, I compiled everything we had found into a detailed dossier. Photos, court records, witness statements, even receipts from the diner where Roger had taken me while I was drugged. It was a comprehensive picture of a professional con artist who had targeted my family as part of a well-established pattern. But I still needed one more piece of evidence. I needed to find Roger himself. Using the information Danny had helped me gather, I was able to trace Roger's movements after he had stolen my money. Bank records that I obtained through a private investigator showed that he had transferred the funds to an account in Nevada, then immediately withdrawn most of it in cash. But Roger had made one crucial mistake. He was still using the same cell phone number he had been using when he was married to Sarah, and according to the cell phone tracking software that Danny helped me install, that phone was currently located in Las Vegas. "Are you going to call the police?" Danny asked. I thought about Detective Morrison's claim that the investigation had been suspended due to my unreliable testimony. I thought about Sarah's campaign to convince everyone that I was mentally unstable. I thought about the way the system had failed me at every turn. "No," I said finally, "I'm going to handle this myself." "But Mr. Hartwell, this guy is dangerous. What if he tries to hurt you?" I looked at the stack of evidence we had compiled, at the proof of Roger's crimes that no one could dispute or explain away. "Danny, I'm 66 years old and everyone thinks I'm losing my mind. What do I have to lose?" The next morning, I booked a flight to Las Vegas. It was time to confront Roger face to face, and this time, I would be the one with the element of surprise. Las Vegas was exactly the kind of place a man like Roger would choose to disappear. The city was full of people reinventing themselves, spending money they shouldn't have, and asking no questions about anyone's past. It was perfect camouflage for a professional con artist. I found him at the Bellagio, sitting at a high-stakes poker table like he belonged there. He was wearing an expensive suit I had never seen before, his hair newly styled, looking every inch the successful businessman he pretended to be. The chips in front of him represented more money than most people saw in a year. My money, Sarah's future, my grandchild's security. All of it stacked neatly in front of the man who had destroyed my family. I watched him for an hour before making my move, studying his mannerisms, his confidence, the way he interacted with the other players. This was Roger in his element, playing a role he had perfected over years of practice. When he finally took a break from the table, I followed him to the bar. He was ordering an expensive scotch when I slid onto the stool beside him. "Hello, Roger." He turned, and for a split second I saw genuine shock in his eyes before his practiced smile slipped into place. "Thomas, what a surprise. What brings you to Vegas? You do." The bartender set down his drink, and Roger took a long sip, buying himself time to think. "I'm not sure I understand." "I think you understand perfectly." I placed a manila envelope on the bar between us. "Everything's in there. The witness statements from the diner, Mrs. Chen's testimony about seeing you load a truck at my house, the court records from California showing your marriage to Linda Martinez, your real name, Robert Phillips, all of it." Roger's hand tightened around his glass, but his expression remained calm. "Thomas, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was mine. I trusted you. Look, I know you're upset about the money situation, but the money situation?" I cut him off. "You drugged me, robbed me, and turned my own daughter against me. That's not a situation, Roger, that's a crime." For the first time, his mask slipped completely. The charming son-in-law disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, I can." I tapped the envelope. "And I already have." Roger glanced around the crowded bar, probably assessing his options for escape. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something. You picked the wrong family to destroy." "Is that a threat?" "No, it's a promise." I stood up to leave, but Roger grabbed my arm. "Wait, we can work something out. I still have most of the money. I'm not interested in making deals with you." "Then what? You're going to turn me into the police? They already decided you're an unreliable witness. Your own daughter thinks you're losing your mind." "You're right, the police won't listen to me. And Sarah has convinced everyone that I'm senile and paranoid." I smiled at him and I could see the confusion in his eyes, but that's exactly why my plan is going to work. "What plan?" Instead of answering, I walked away, leaving the envelope on the bar. Inside was only a single photograph, Roger at the poker table surrounded by stacks of chips. On the back I'd written a simple message, "Found you." My real plan was already in motion. While I had been watching Roger gamble away my money, Danny had been busy back home. Using the information we had gathered about Roger's previous victims, we had contacted Linda Martinez and the families from the other states where Roger had operated. It turned out that Roger had left a trail of devastated families across the country, and many of them were still trying to recover their losses. When they learned that we had located him and could provide evidence of his current identity and location, they were more than willing to cooperate. Linda Martinez proved to be particularly helpful. She had kept detailed records of Roger's con, including bank account numbers, phone records, and even recordings of conversations where he had admitted to his crimes. "I've been trying to track him down for months," she told me during our phone conversation. "He destroyed my father's retirement, but the police said there wasn't enough evidence to pursue it across state lines. Well, now we have enough evidence to bury him, but I wasn't content to simply turn Roger over to the authorities. He had made this personal when he turned Sarah against me. He had damaged relationships that could never be fully repaired. A simple arrest wouldn't undo the pain he had caused, so I decided to give Roger a taste of his own medicine. Using the same techniques he had used on me, I began systematically destroying his new identity. I contacted the casinos where he was gambling and provided evidence that he was using stolen money. I reached out to the women he was currently dating through his fake online profiles and showed them proof of his criminal history. Most importantly, I contacted his new marks. Because Roger, true to form, was already working on his next con, through his credit card records, which Linda had helped me access, I discovered that Roger was living in an expensive apartment with a woman named Patricia Hoffman, a wealthy widow in her 70s. According to Danny's research, Patricia had recently lost her husband and inherited a substantial estate. I arrived at Patricia's apartment building on a Tuesday morning, carrying a briefcase full of evidence and wearing my best suit. I looked like exactly what I was. A concerned, elderly gentleman with important information to share. Patricia was a lovely woman, refined and intelligent, exactly the type of vulnerable target Roger preferred. When I explained who I was and why I was there, she invited me in for coffee and listened to my story with growing horror. "You're saying that Robert has done this before?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Multiple times, and he's in the process of doing it to you right now." I showed her the court records, the witness statements, the photographs of Roger with his previous victims. By the time I finished, Patricia was crying. "He asked me to invest in a business opportunity," she whispered. "Real estate development in Arizona. He said he needed $200,000 to secure the partnership." "Patricia, there is no business opportunity. There never is with Roger. He's going to take your money and disappear just like he did to me and all the others." That afternoon, Patricia called Roger and told him she needed time to think about the investment. That evening, she wore a wire provided by the Las Vegas police and recorded Roger pressuring her to sign the papers immediately. "These opportunities don't wait, sweetheart." Roger's voice was clear on the recording. "If you don't act now, someone else will take your place." "But $200,000 is so much money. Patricia, you trust me, don't you? I would never put you in danger. This is about our future together." The recording captured everything. Roger's manipulation tactics, his lies about the investment, and most damning of all, his admission that he had access to Patricia's bank accounts. "I can handle all the paperwork for you," he said. "You won't have to worry about any of the details," the same words he had used with me. When the police arrested Roger the next morning, they found him in Patricia's apartment, preparing to transfer her money to the same Nevada account he had used for my funds. In his possession were fake identification documents, multiple credit cards under different names, and detailed notes about Patricia's financial assets. But the most satisfying moment came when Detective Morrison called me to apologize. "Mr. Hartwell, I owe you an explanation. We never suspended the investigation into your case. Someone impersonating a police officer called your daughter and told her that we had closed the case due to insufficient evidence." "Someone impersonating an officer?" "We believe it was one of Roger's associates. He's been using this tactic to discredit victims and prevent them from cooperating with law enforcement." The truth was finally coming to light. Roger hadn't just been a con artist, he had been part of a sophisticated operation designed to destroy the credibility of anyone who tried to expose him. What happens now? Roger is facing federal charges in multiple states. The evidence you provided was instrumental in building the case against him. And Mr. Hartwell? Your daughter called this morning. She wants to speak with you. When Sarah arrived at my house that evening, she looked like she had aged 10 years in the past month. Her face was puffy from crying, and she moved slowly, as if carrying a tremendous weight. "Dad, I owe you an apology that I'll never be able to adequately express." I guided her to the kitchen table, the same place where we had first learned about Roger's betrayal. "I was so embarrassed," she continued, "so humiliated that I had been fooled so completely. It seemed easier to blame your confusion than to admit that I had married a criminal." "Sarah, you were a victim too." "No, Dad. I became his accomplice the moment I started lying for him. I destroyed your reputation to protect mine. I turned our family against you because I couldn't face the truth about what I had done." She placed a check on the table between us. "Roger had life insurance policies that Patricia helped us access. It's not all of the money he stole, but it's enough to pay off your loan and cover the interest." I looked at the check. $290,000, more than enough to erase the debt Roger had left me with. What about you and the baby? We'll be fine. Patricia is actually helping me find a job with her late husband's company. She says she understands what it's like to be deceived by someone you trust. I folded the check and handed it back to her. Keep it. Start a college fund for my grandchild. Dad, I can't. Yes, you can. That baby is going to need a strong mother, and you're going to need resources to raise a child on your own. This money can give you both a fresh start. Sarah broke down completely then, sobbing in a way that reminded me of the little girl she used to be. I held her until the tears stopped, feeling like I had my daughter back for the first time in months. 6 months later, I stood in the hospital room where Sarah had given birth to my grandson, Thomas Michael Phillips, named after me and his grandfather. Sarah had decided to keep Roger's last name for legal simplicity, but she made it clear that the baby would know nothing of his father, except that he was not part of their lives. As I held my grandson for the first time, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. Roger had tried to destroy our family, but in the end, he had only made us stronger. The lies had been exposed, the truth had prevailed, and justice had been served. And sometimes that's the best revenge of all, living well, loving deeply, and refusing to let evil people dim the light in your life. Roger was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to all of his victims. The investigation led to the arrest of his 2 accomplices and the recovery of assets from victims across multiple states. But more importantly, Sarah and I rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of truth and mutual respect. We had both learned that family isn't about perfection. It's about forgiveness, honesty, and standing together when it matters most. And every time I look at my grandson's face, I'm reminded that some bonds are stronger than any deception, and that love, real love, always finds a way to survive.